The TD21, built from 1958 to 1963 in Coventry with 120 horsepower and 2,993 cc engine capacity. This is just one of thousands of cars that put the city on the roadmap of motoring. From Daimler to Hillman and Rover to Triumph, and also from the very first £100 car and this beautifully handcrafted Alvis TD21 drop-head coupe. Coventry built them all. So what remains of the city's wonderful legacy? Well, I'm putting pedal to the metal to find out. The first wheels to turn in Coventry manufacturing were not that of the car, but of a smaller transport vehicle, the bicycle. Bicycle production took over from the dwindling industries of cotton and silk. The skilled labour and the machinery of the old businesses were used to create a new one, and a highly successful one at that. By 1871, 70% of the country's bicycles were built in the Midlands. The bicycle industry was booming, and Coventry was known as the cycle capital of the world. But it was the beginning of the century and industry wasn't standing still, it was moving forward at full pelt. This was a time of invention and experimentation. Germany had successfully produced the first motor car, and ripples of its success were coming across the channel. And Coventry was ideally situated. It had the workforce, it had the machinery, and it had the skill to produce motor cars. So where others feared to tread, Coventry hit the road. Some engineers were sceptical of the future of the motor trade, but when the first Coventry Daimler emerged from the Motor Mills factory in 1886, Britain's motoring industry was born. And what an industry it was, producing some of the first cars of the day. Driven by king, but at the cost of 10 times that of a house, not yet by country. The early cars were made by master craftsmen, unique in their skills, pushing boundaries of design. One such company made my favourite car, and you may be surprised to know they are still making them today. This car's incredible, it really is. I love the fact that it's got a sprung steering wheel. It's got power steering now, of course. The seats have been padded out, a little more comfort there. Armrests where there weren't any in the first place, but I tell you what, freedom of the road in this. I'd like to sell all my antiques to buy this. I really would. Couldn't afford this one, but one like it and get it restored over time, and it will become a great investment. You can't lose money with practical classics like this. Drives like a dream. And on that bombshell, I'm going to put my foot down, as Jeremy Clarkson would say. And to tell me more about these beautiful vehicles, owner of Alvis, Alan Stote. How long would it have taken to make a car like this?
Well, a few thousand hours, because everything was handmade. Alvis had to make patterns to make the castings, they had to design everything, they had to hand fettle everything. Everything was put together by hand.
Yeah, I can
the whole thing was crafted.
I can see an ashwork frame there going
well,
around.
that frame, that's the skeleton of the body skin, and all of that would have had to have been made by the coach builder. I mean, we've got records showing that cars could have exactly what you wanted on the car. It was absolutely hand-built and handcrafted and tailored to a discerning customer.
You're just about to answer my next question then, because I was going to say, who was Alvis selling to at the time?
Well, there were a few celebrities. Douglas Bader had 3 cars. Benjamin Britten had one. The Duke and Benra bought one personally and still owns it to this day.
What made you fall in love with the Alvis car?
I think it's the individuality of each car. They were made to order. Customers could have exactly what they wanted on the car. The car records we have, 22,000 of them, show what each car was, and I think that there are no two the same.
So they really do play an incredible part of British motoring history.
Oh, without a doubt. For a relatively small company,
Yeah.
they only produced 22,000 cars between 1920 and 1967.
That's not a lot, is it?
Not a lot, but there's nearly a quarter of those cars still in existence.
Alvis cars were made by highly skilled craftsmen, but as the middle classes took to motoring, demand grew, and mass-scale production was the only option. Production lines started to replace the craft-based skilled workforce, and Coventry's motoring industry sped into a new age of mass production. Throughout the 40s, 50s and 60s, Coventry's factories provided 23% of the UK output. People came from all over the world to work here, and the city benefited with the thriving economy. And like most booms, a bust was soon to follow. Companies like Alvis and Triumph were taken over by giants British Leyland. And the 1970s saw relationships between trade unions and management breaking down. There were many strikes and production lines came to a halt. Now add that to the pressure of cheaper cars being imported from abroad, and you can see why time was running out for the British car industry. From the 1970s onwards, the term British car manufacturing became a complicated combination of words. Rolls-Royce was sold to BMW, Mini was made by British Leyland, and when Jaguar and Land Rover were sold to Tata in 2008, it seemed mass production of British cars had bitten the dust. But what remains of the halcyon days of car manufacturing should not be resigned to the scrap heap. The British car is far from dead, and classic cars are still being collected and restored today more so than ever. And of course, they only go up in value. They represent the perfect investment. And British cars are still being made, albeit in a much smaller quantity. Morgan, the only true full British sports car, is still making around 600 vehicles a year. You can buy classic names still like Aston Martin and Triumph, or you can order yourself a bespoke Alvis original like this one made from the 1938 blueprint. The British motor car was born in Coventry. It grew up in Coventry and it lives on in Coventry.